Once more, hello everybody. Welcome to a program curated by Valeria Graziano, Marcel Mars, and Tomislav Medak from Pirate Care, who are also with us today in this workshop. They have created a program to showcase strategies, agendas, and practitioners of Pirate Care, and we will hear a little bit more introductory remarks afterwards. I will just quickly share that next week we have another talk going on with Chris Gorodsky and Morana Miljanovic from Sea-Watch, and another workshop then on Friday. So the talk is on Tuesday, and next Friday we have a workshop by Cassie Thornton, the hologram, Collective Health as a Beautiful Artwork. So please, if you want to participate, register again for those two events. Just some remarks on how we proceed today, like practically. So we ask you to keep your mics and muted and your videos switched off, but it should be possible that you turn them on at any point when you think it's necessary or you want to contribute. Still, we would ask you maybe also to share your questions over the chat. And we will also have an eye on that and collect them, because there will be points of Q&A. Me and my name is Andrea Hubin, and Flora Schausberger from Kunsthalle Wien, we will be there to co-host everything, and we'll help in the collection of the questions and share them. Then just once more, the remark, the session will be recorded. So the recording is already going on. And we want to thank you once more to allow us to spread the message, also the important messages, I think, that that will be discussed today in this way. And last thing is just that yesterday we had a little bug that at one point it seemed that the chat was switched off for some of the participants. So if some kind of bug like this that doesn't allow you to contribute to the session in some way, please try somehow to notify us, maybe by switching off your video, waving panickingly with your hands to make me or Flora notice that something is not going well, or to simply post it in the chat if this is available at the moment. Okay, yeah, I think that's it for the opening remarks. And there I would like to hand over to Marcel Mars from Pirate Care to also do some welcoming.
Yeah, hello everyone. Today I'm a little bit more relaxed, I must say, because this is like super stressful. Mary, it's your turn now. It's like super stressful to do this. It's kind of like a beautiful thing to see in some way, like when people started to say hello from here, from there. It's kind of, it becomes real that that it's virtual, no? And it's completely different than how we meant this to be just few months ago. So we met for the first time in person with Mary at our collective syllabus writing retreat in Rijeka in November. And we were at the time, we were trying to see, okay, so what would be the common denominator? What are the topics? How to do that? But what we knew for sure is that there will be the activation, that what we are writing when we write is that, that we are writing something which will be activated with the others to learn together. And yeah, this is now a little bit different than what we meant, what we like imagined to do. And what I'm like super happy is that if I went to see through the topics from what we had at the time in Rijeka, I wouldn't feel that Mary would be the first one really to like make it this way. And I'm like super happy to see it. I can see it as an experiment, but also I could imagine how it could work in a great way. But at the same time, I was not surprised, because I really like the humor and the way how Mary like brings like different things together, how you could bring like environmental politics with something which is very much into the body, how to put the body into the environmental politics, then what's going on with the toxicities. And what I also like and share is kind of like our let's say like a similar approach where you can be proud to be amateur and to be curious and to do things. Yeah, I knew a little bit before about like bacteria, and we kind of shared some of the circles. I don't know. I don't want to go for too long. I can see also like Deborah is here. That's kind of like a mutual friend by at least by association with bacteria and the others. So I don't know. Maybe Tommy or Valeria, if you want to say something. I would just like to welcome once again everyone to this workshop and invite Mary, if Valeria and Tommy don't say anything in next 5 seconds.
I'll just say hi to everyone.
Okay. I would like to pass the unmuting microphone to Mary. Mary, please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, Marcel. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Because I'm using this like wireless headphone thing. If anyone cannot hear me, just write a message in the chat. So now I'm going to share my screen, and so we can get started on the presentation. Okay. So I hope everyone can see this. So I completely agree with you, Marcel. This is a very strange format. Usually my workshops are in person, but I'm still super excited that we can do this, especially during quarantine times. And I really have to thank Kunsthalle and also Pirate Care for hosting this. So I guess let's just get started because we have a lot to go through. So first of all, I'm an artist and a researcher, and I've been researching hormones since 2015. And the way that I came across this topic really started with one very speculative question, which is, what if it were possible to create estrogen in the kitchen? So I think before we continue, it's good to first ask ourselves, what exactly is estrogen? So this is actually a collection of images. It's a screenshot, actually, when I Google the word estrogen and do a Google image search. So as you can see, this collection of images is actually very telling. It's very revealing about our relationship and how we and our understanding of estrogen. So if you look at it, we see a lot of these pharmaceutical products that are for menopausal symptoms, for contraception, for hormone replacement therapy. And we also see a lot of images that reinforce our notions of femininity. We have larger breasts, we have softer facial features. And so these are things that we think of when we think of femininity. So as a researcher, I was kind of curious, well, how did we even arrive at this point where, we have these black box definitions of, estrogen coding for femininity and testosterone coding for masculinity. So for the first kind of 15 minutes or so of the presentation, I'm going to do like a very brief history of hormone entanglements and really try to do this social excavation of how we now have these molecules basically coding for our gender subjectivities. Okay, so this is a really good quote by Ian Hacking. "We did not find sex hormones somewhere in a lost corner, like a desert island lost in the mist. We ourselves called sex hormones into existence." So this is a quote that I think is very similar to another famous Donna Haraway quote, which is, "Bodies are not born, they are made." So as I go through this brief history, I'd like us all to think about how bodies are produced through science. And although science tries to present itself as very neutral and truth-seeking, actually science is reinforcing all of these pre-existing biases, especially when it comes to gender, sex, and sexuality. So beginning in the late 1800s, there was this concept of organotherapy, which is basically saying that there are these essences of femininity and masculinity that is found in these organs. So particularly the gonads, which are ovaries and testicles. So scientists like Brown-Séquard, they would take these like testicle extracts from monkeys and other animals, and they would ingest them themselves. And they would claim that these organ extracts would cure them of old age. They would revive them of virility and masculinity. So these were kind of the first like hormonal treatments that scientists were exploring. And later on, in order to confirm that these organs contain these essences, these gender essences, scientists like Eugene Steinack, who's actually an Austrian scientist, he used to perform these experiments actually in the Prater. It's like kind of an amusement park in Vienna. He had his little science lab there, and he would perform these testicular transplants into castrated roosters, for example. So these roosters that had been castrated, once they had these new testicles, Eugene Steinack would claim that these roosters now exhibited more territorial behavior, more aggressive behavior. And of course, these are things that we think of, associated with masculinity. Later on, these extracts were used on gay men, for example, to possibly cure them of homosexuality. So you can already see that not only are there gender biases, inscribed into the research, but also any form of queerness or gender identity or sexuality that is existing outside of male and female was systematically trying to be erased through these organ extract treatments. And once scientists saw that there could be a huge profit coming from these organ extracts, this kind of set off the European hormones cartel race to conquest the hormones. So one really famous example is Organon, which is a Dutch company. So all of these companies were basically in a race to isolate and purify and then basically market these molecules to people. And during this time, we didn't have any kind of like molecular visualizing technology. Like there's no way that we could really verify that what we had here was in fact estrogen. The only way to really verify that was through these bioassays that I mentioned earlier with Eugene Steinack, which we know now is like extremely biased. So one really interesting example was with urine. So as scientists and the pharmaceutical industry, as they were trying to find a viable source of hormones, they thought, well, urine is a very good source because we constantly make urine, and it's easy to extract. So what they had was basically like a industry of pregnant horses that they would constantly impregnate in order to collect their urine. And this was actually a dominant prescription for menopausal symptoms. And let's keep in mind that the estrogens that come out in the urine, they're actually conjugated. So they actually have a weaker effect. So you wouldn't really use conjugated urinary estrogens for hormone replacement therapy or for contraception, but they seem to work for menopausal symptoms. And of course, I have to mention the pill as next in this timeline. So estrogen and progesterone are actually the most highly manufactured synthetic compounds in the world today, which goes to show how much the pharmaceutical industry is profiting off of hormonal contraception marketed towards women. So I like to call the pill the American lifestyle drug because last time I checked, I think more than half of the population, the female population, was using hormonal contraception. It's quite a controversial molecule, actually, because it was basically a symbol of the feminist, second wave feminist movement in the 50s and 60s, and also a symbol of female liberation, sexual liberation, also freedom from domesticity. So it was representing all of these things. But later on, feminists and also scientists and the greater public realized that the pill was actually killing women by increasing mood disorders, depression, and also various cancers, reproductive cancers, high blood pressure, blood clots, and things like that. So, you know, the other side of this story is that, you know, there are many developing nations that, you know, actually really need the pill. They have a scarcity of contraceptive methods, and a lot of women actually die from having too many pregnancies. So I think to this day, the pill continues to be a very controversial pharmaceutical product. And there's no doubt that we have been completely become dependent on this pill as one of the only contraceptive methods available to us. And what's also interesting is, so Paul Preciado, who is a writer and theorist, and I really recommend reading their work. They actually compared the first design of the pill dispensary, as a panopticon, which the panopticon was basically an architectural style for prisons. So the image on the right is actually the way a prison would be set up, where all the prisoners are in the middle, and then so you have this constant surveillance from the periphery. So the pill is actually enacting the same kind of surveillance on bodies, especially female bodies, in terms of reproducing sexuality, reproducing femininity. So we can see how these hormonal technologies are can be seen and implemented as a form of biosurveillance. And just to do like a brief plug-in, these are some of the books that were very helpful for my research in terms of mapping this very complex hormonal history. And please feel free to take screenshots at any time if you want to refer back to these books later. So to continue on our hormonal history, I'm going to talk about DES, diethylstilbestrol, which is a synthetic estrogen that they were kind of exploring in the mid-1900s. So diethylstilbestrol, it's one of the first synthetic compounds because, you know, they figured out, well, it's probably more cost effective to make synthetic hormones rather than constantly sourcing from pregnant horse urine. So this is one of the first synthetic estrogens, and they actually prescribed it to women who were pregnant because they claimed that it would prevent miscarriage. What they didn't know was that later on, this synthetic estrogen was producing a legacy of very rare cervical cancers that not only affected the pregnant women, but also affected their offspring and then the offspring of their offspring. So we have like a transgenerational legacy of basically toxicity. And what's even more interesting is before they had DES, they were playing around with BPA as a possible form of synthetic estrogen therapy. And I think most of us recognize BPA as being a very common plasticizer. So this is where the pharmaceutical industry is kind of intersecting with the petrochemical industry, because we like to see them as very separate industries, but they're very, very much intertwined. So BPA, we actually know it to be estrogenic since the 1930s because we know they were testing them on women to produce these feminizing effects before they switched to DES. So you could say that we've been undergoing this queering, you know, since the 1930s with BPA, and now BPA is one of the most prolific compounds that we find in the environment, in our clothing, in our food, in our urine, in our bodies, in our blood, in our everything, furniture, everything. So since environmentalists have been, you know, calling attention to BPA, the petrochemical industry has created another compound called BPS, which, you know, is not that different from BPA, but that means, you know, they don't have to label a product saying, oh, it's BPA free. Well, it might contain BPS, which is the same as BPA anyway. So next we have atrazine, which comes from the agricultural industry, which is another one of these industries, capitalist industries, that is really polluting our planet and our bodies. So this kind of came about the same time as Rachel Carlson wrote Silent Spring and basically called attention to all of these environmental abnormalities. So basically frogs were turning up, you know, having testicles and ovaries, you know, in the same body. And at first they were blaming suburban housewives for, you know, peeing out their birth control pills into the water supply. But soon they realized that, you know, it was atrazine, this pesticide, that was causing these reproductive effects. And just to let you know, I have the chat window open, so if anyone wants to leave comments or questions, I will be able to read them. The last molecule I'm going to discuss is PCB. PCB is quite interesting because very recently they discovered PCB at in the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest parts of the ocean. PCB is probably as prolific as BPA, and the effects are quite similar to dioxin, which is, as we know, is very similar to Agent Orange, which was used during the Vietnam War. And Agent Orange has also this legacy effect of causing crippling diseases, even in today's generation. So I kind of frame this phenomenon of the Anthropocene as a kind of molecular colonization on our bodies and also environments. And the reason why I use the word colonization is because there is a very, very all of these toxicities are deeply tied to patriarchal capitalism. And all of these pre-existing lines of inequality, of course, take into effect when we're talking about pollution and toxicities. And also, I forgot to mention before that when I talk about these molecules, these harmful molecules, lots of scientists will use the word persistent organic pollutants, POPs, and they will use that interchangeably with endocrine disrupting compounds, which is EDCs. And sometimes I will use the word xenoestrogen because these compounds, they are foreign, which means they're xeno, they're coming from outside of the body, but they are estrogen mimicking or estrogen displacing. So there are many terms for these compounds, but I will try to just stick with endocrine disruptors or xenoestrogens for the purpose of this lecture. So just to talk a little bit about what's happening at the molecular level. So why are all these compounds affecting our bodies and essentially communicating to our bodies? Well, if you look at the estrogen receptor, which is the green molecule, scientists have described this receptor as very promiscuous, which is kind of an interesting way to describe a receptor. But basically what they're saying is that this receptor has many keys that fit into its lock. So that would be the opposite of selective, because if it's selective, then it would have very few keys for its lock. So the estrogen receptor, which is one of the most ancient and evolutionary conserved molecules, is actually, it's very promiscuous, and it invites a lot of communication with with a huge array of different molecules. So that's why you have this molecular semiosis happening with these industrial compounds that we didn't even intend for them to communicate to our bodies, but they do, which I kind of see as one of the greatest paradoxes of living in the Anthropocene, is that we created all of these molecules through petrochemical, agricultural, and pharmaceutical industry, and they in fact are communicating to our bodies and creating a cascade effect. So for example, EDCs, as I mentioned before, is the endocrine disrupting compounds. And so at each point in this cascade, the endocrine disrupting compounds, these xenoestrogens, these are points where they can potentially interfere with our communication system in our bodies. So we start with the endocrine gland, which is, we have various endocrine glands around our bodies, and this is basically regulating our metabolism and our normal body functions. So a xenoestrogen can interfere there. And then when a hormone is secreted into our blood, an endocrine disruptor can interfere at that point as well. And then finally, where the hormone that is secreted is communicating with the target tissue, then it can also get disrupted at that point. So what are these effects? What are the effects of the communication, the semiosis that happens? Well, first of all, there are lots of physiological effects. We have early onset puberty. We have diabetes, obesity. The sperm count of men in Europe has dropped by 50%. And then we have also neurological effects. We have ADHD, autism, lower IQ, mood disorders. And finally, we have a huge variety of reproductive cancers. And I just want to point out that, you know, in the media, they do like to focus on the reproductive effects. I think that there's a greater scare when it comes to, you know, our genitals, our reproductive functions being interfered with, our gender being interfered with. However, there are other effects that are physiological, that are neurological, that are not really mentioned as much in the media. I also want to point out that, I said before that that pre-existing lines of inequality are affecting how and where the toxicity travels and affects. So one really good book that covers this is Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor by Rob Nixon. So slow violence is a very interesting phrase, I would say, because so the author is basically comparing, when we have a huge catastrophe like a bomb dropping or like the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl, these are disasters that we can really see, and they have a really big effect. But when it's something very slow and very invisible and imperceptible, something like climate change, this is something more difficult to really have a public discourse about, and basically, I think allows for all of this industrial lobbying, corporate lobbying to happen behind the public eye. So another really good resource is a website called Discard Studies, which really ties in a lot about waste colonialism, and gives a lot of examples of how indigenous and marginalized communities are especially affected by something like toxic dumping. I also wanted to situate this presentation with the Corona situation. So some of the ramifications that I've been seeing that relate to the topic of hormones, gender, sex, body politics, and environmental toxicity. I'm just going to give a couple of examples. So artist Adriana Knopf actually wrote a very interesting kind of Corona diary, talking about how all of this forced isolation is also enforcing these heteronormative nuclear family models, and which I thought was really interesting, because you can see how the coronavirus is acting as sort of an ally for enforcing these family models, and also eliminating these kinship ties that we have with queer communities. And I really, really love Adriana's work, because quite recently, she was one of the first artists to release transgender art into space. So I would definitely check out her work. Another kind of ramification of the coronavirus that we see is an increase in corporate climate lobbying. So this is kind of a map that I found from a website called influencemap.org, which is basically showing all of these corporate entities that are lobbying, in favor of destroying the planet. And this is all happening, like all of these like extractivist activities are happening, while we're all distracted, during quarantine times. So this is a website that I would recommend following, because they post updates and also a lot of data on these companies that are basically doing horrible things to the planet. I know everything I said was really depressing. So I want to just switch gears now and present this quote. Just as the body can be stolen, it can also be reclaimed. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about my own research and practice, and also examples of other practices that are basically acting as social resistances to everything that's happening to our bodies and environments. So for a while, I've been doing this kind of hormone hacking, estrogen demystification practice. And there are many terms for this. There's, do it yourself, do it with others, biohacking, hormone hacking, estrogen geeking, freak science. But probably the phrase that I think I most identify with is public amateurism, which is a phrase that is taken from Claire Pentecost and also from Critical Art Ensemble. And it's an idea, it's the concept of taking in knowledge that is usually kept behind closed doors, whether academic or corporate, and basically bringing that knowledge and practice into the public sphere where we can learn and do and also fail together. I'm also very much inspired by Hackteria, which Marcel mentioned earlier, which is basically a global online network with the tagline, open source biological arts, which really is in response to the bioart world presenting these projects as needing a lot of funding, a lot of collaboration with scientists and academia. And Hackteria is basically saying, well, anyone can practice biology, and there's nothing techno-futuristic or expensive about it. In fact, we have always been biohackers from the very beginning when we were making cheese or fermenting beer. These are all forms of biohacking, and there's nothing techno-futuristic about it. My practice is also very much inspired by the trans-hack feminists and Gina Punk Lab. They consider themselves a riot of bodies. So, for example, Paula Pinn is really famous for creating DIY gynecology protocols, such as checking your cervix for any kind of cervical abnormalities. She's been working a lot with webcam microscopes, for example, and also 3D printed, I'm blanking on what that's called. I'm blanking, I'm sorry. But this tool where they stick into your vagina in the OBGYN. And of course, I'm very much inspired by Sub Rosa, which is one of the earliest cyberfeminist collectives. They were very, very active in the early 2000s. But what they would do is a lot of their projects were performed in the public sphere, and they were also performing the language and tactics of a lot of these biotech companies that were marketing technologies towards women, such as assisted reproductive technologies like stem cell therapy and things like that. So they were really, I would say, deconstructing that language and those marketing tactics. And in the process of performing them, we can understand the biopolitics at play. Speculum, thank you. Okay. So my computer has a bit of a screen malfunction at the moment.
Okay, we don't, actually for us it still looks great, Mary.
Okay, interesting. Because my screen is like, it just like whited out.
Okay.
Okay, but I will try to carry on. Let me just.
Does anyone else experience difficulties to see things? Maybe just let us know in the chat whether everything is working fine.
Oh, okay, it's back. Wow, that's so weird. I really need to fix my computer. So let's pray that doesn't happen again. Okay. I think it's a graphics card issue. Okay, the next artist collective that I will talk about is Critical Art Ensemble. Super famous, iconic. I really love what they did in the project Molecular Invasion, which they basically took Monsanto's soybean crop and they reverse engineered it so that it's no longer resistant to the pesticide that you have to buy with the seeds. So in this kind of public performance, they basically showed that these organisms that we thought were black boxes can actually be opened and dissected and basically reverse engineered and used for social resistance. They have a really, really great 7-point plan for cultural resistance in their book, Molecular Invasion. And inspired by this, I actually wrote a 6-point plan for hormone clearing resistance. I apologize for all of this text. You don't have to read all of it, but I just want to let you know that in this workshop, we can cover points 1 and 2, building public understanding for the xenoforces at play, and number 2, pave way for hormone hacking, freak science, and amateur exploration. I also want to talk about point 6, which is considering the microperformativity of the hormones as, you know, not only an agential power of molecular colonization, but also molecular collaboration. So that's kind of where I want to move us away from this panic and into, you know, how we can actually find agency and body sovereignty in these very toxic times. You know, seeing the molecule as not only something that we're colonized by, but something that we could collaborate with. So that will become more clear later on. So I'm going to go through a couple of like estrogen geeking freak science examples that I've done in the past couple years. So the first one was experimenting with these biosensors, these yeast biosensors, because at the time, this was like 2015, 2016, I was really, really interested in how we can detect the slow violence that's happening to our bodies. Like, how can we see the molecular semiosis, you know, this communication of the receptor and the xenoestrogen? Like, how could we see that? So I was looking into these yeast biosensors as a very viable form of detection, and which can be done in a DIY setting. So normally, if a company wants to like test like a water supply, you know, if it has any like contaminants or pollutants inside, what they would do is go to a lab, and the lab has these huge machines called like GCMS, gas chromatography, mass spectrometer, something like that. And basically, they would put in a sample of the water, and then the machine would basically say like, okay, we detect this, 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 this. And these are all compounds that we've already previously identified. Whereas the yeast biosensors, theoretically, they could tell us, they could detect something that we don't even know is estrogenic. So that's what I find kind of interesting about these yeast biosensors. Not only can we visualize what's happening, but they're basically acting as extensions of our bodies. So when they turn yellow in the presence of the xenoestrogen, that's how I know like whatever I'm testing is in fact, you know, communicating to my estrogen receptors. And this is an example of my detection lab. As you can see, I put it in a suitcase because at one point my practice was very nomadic. Like I was going from country to country, doing these workshops and doing these like collaborative hacking sessions. And as you can see, like I'm carrying a lot of like reagents and biological samples, yeast samples in petri dishes, chemicals, and I never got in trouble with the airport security, which is kind of interesting. I was testing this actually. I was testing like how far can I go carrying all of this scientific stuff, and my conclusion is that I think they're just interested in batteries and bombs. Like I think that, you know, carrying biological stuff, they're not so vigilant about. I don't know. The next estrogen geeking protocol I will present is kind of a do-it-yourself solid phase extraction. So let's say you wanted to use the yeast for detecting if your river is polluted. So when you collect a water sample, first of all, like here's your water sample, you can see that it's extremely dilute. and the pollutants that are inside, you know, you have to find a way to concentrate them. So what me and some collaborators figured out was you could use something like a peristaltic pump, something like this, and this is just a very, it's like maybe 10 euros or something. It's a little peristaltic pump, and you could run your water sample through this and have it connected to one of these filters. So these filters are a little bit harder to come by because sometimes you need like an academic license in order to buy these filters. But basically, these are specially designed filters to basically isolate and capture all of the pollutants that would be in your water supply. Before we had access to this, we were actually experimenting with cigarette filters because we were all smokers, rolling our own tobacco, and we decided to try those filters, which is bringing us to the next protocol, which is a DIY column chromatography experiment. So this is the experiment that we're actually going to do today. Like, I have the whole setup behind me in my kitchen. And basically, I like to use this protocol for extracting urinary hormones. I will say that the hormones that we are going to collect in our urine, they're not going to be specifically estrogen because it's super, super difficult to really like isolate and purify only estrogen. But what we will collect is basically a huge collection of hormones that have this six-ring structure. This six-ring structure is basically what classifies it as a steroid hormone. And steroid hormones are very fatty. Like, you should have the image of like oil or something really fatty, and therefore can pass through the skin. That's what makes, you know, these molecules like potentially very harmful because they can pass through the skin very easily and get absorbed through the skin. But what's interesting about the hormones is that they also have these polar kind of attachments to the six-ring structure, which makes it water soluble. So that's why you also find these hormones, you know, in fluids and in watery bodies. These hormones also are carried through air pollution. So so we have not only water to worry about, but also air. And this is an example of the suitcase I have for the extraction methods. This is currently on display, I think, in Philadelphia. Yeah, in Philadelphia Museum of Art. But basically, what we have are, you know, we have the DIY peristaltic pumps, and we have the column chromatography experiments, and that's all like housed in there. And this is kind of what it looks like when the hormones are extracted from the urine. So you can see it's like this brown sticky substance. And what I find really fascinating is I have the participants like smell the hormones, and I always get 1 out of 3 reactions. The first reaction is like, oh my God, it smells disgusting, get it away from me. The second reaction is, oh, it actually smells kind of sweet, like it smells like caramel or candy. And then the last reaction is like, I don't smell anything at all. So this really reminds me of dogs, like when dogs are smelling each other's asses. Usually dogs will have like 1 out of 3 responses. Like, they'll really like that dog, they'll really hate that dog and like want to fight, or they just like don't care. So I feel like these hormones, like once they're outside of the body, they're actually pheromones. So these pheromones are actually like activating something very ancient and evolutionary in our minds. So I find that like really fascinating. If this were a workshop in person, you know, we would be doing this with each other, like smelling each other's hormones. And here are some images from the workshops that I had in the past. You can see that it gets really, really messy. And that's the kind of mess that I really like to embrace, actually. It's kind of like countering the sterility that we see, not only in the lab, but also in gallery settings, this kind of like sterile white box. Whereas, you know, biology doesn't really behave that way. It's quite messy. The last protocol I'm going to talk about is actually like mushroom hacking. So I was really lucky to do a residency with Paula Pinn and Ryan Hammond, who is another hormone hacking artist. And we were exploring this mushroom called Schizophyllum commune, which actually has like more than 22,000 different sexes, which is really, really queer. And basically, it's been covered in a lot of scientific journals for having these bioremediation properties. So it has these enzymes that are able to break down toxicities like plastic or other kinds of endocrine disrupting compounds. So we did an experiment where we basically were feeding xenoestrogens to the mushrooms, like xenoestrogens that we extracted from like cosmetics, makeup and soap and plastic. So we made this like xenoestrogen cocktail and we're giving it to the mushrooms. And we had this hypothesis that the mushrooms would actually be even more activated, like their enzymes would work even faster in the presence of these xenoestrogens. So we did this experiment with other people, and then we uploaded images because it takes about a week or 2 weeks for the mushrooms to really grow. And basically, as the petri dish is getting decolorized, like turning from blue to this like pinkish color, that's basically tracking the activity of the mushroom's enzymes. So you can see, you know, that they really are like decolorizing. And we kind of thought about this decolorization as a metaphor for decolonization. So I guess the big question is, you know, like after we do all of these like detection techniques, extraction techniques, you know, the big question still kind of remains is like, how do we live, act, and care in a permanently polluted world? Because it is very depressing. It is very, it makes people quite anxious to think about, you know, this world that we live in, that our bodies are indeed stolen, and it makes us, you know, very, yeah, we live in very precarious times. So I came across this paper through my research about this species of fish that scientists were trying to they're trying to hybridize these two different species. And then they accidentally created a hermaphrodite fish that has both ovaries and testicles. And I think also, yeah, they have both male and female genitals, basically. So this fish can self-reproduce if it cannot find a mate in the environment. So what was even more interesting is that in the title of this paper, they called this fish a hopeful monster, which is really interesting for a scientific paper to use the phrase hopeful monster. And it got me thinking, like, why can't we also think of our bodies as being hopeful? Because, you know, one can argue that all of us have a body that is currently constantly queering. Like I said before, you know, we find PCBs in the deepest parts of the ocean. You know, if you tested my blood right now, you would find plastic. So in a sense, you know, we're all undergoing this passive queering, which is really what interested me in the beginning of my research, because, you know, I started with, you know, this very like, how can we democratize the process of creating estrogen by making it in the kitchen? You know, for people who are trans, for females who want to have contraceptive method, you know, it started from this point of like wanting to actively queer your body by having access to these hormones. And then it became this kind of, well, but all of our bodies are already passively queering. So there was this tension between active queering and passive queering that I found really interesting. And what kind of ties it all together for me is the issue of body sovereignty, how to really take control and agency back from these corporate entities that have been regulating, disciplining, and polluting our bodies. And what I find really interesting also is the kind of cultural discourse that follows the discussion around pollution and toxicity. Like in my research, I came across a lot of these like articles that are basically saying like, oh, I don't think it's right that the government is putting birth control pills in the water supply because it's turning all the men gay, and we need men and women to, you know, heterosexually reproduce the human species. And maybe this is a conversation that is more important than, you know, refugees crossing the borders. So, you know, for me, it's like, wow. So we have like homophobia, transphobia, and xenophobia, like all in one, like person's blog post about xenoestrogens. And it got me really thinking about, you know, how do we as a society, you know, how do we carry out toxic discourse in a way that isn't, you know, slipping back into this kind of very, very heteronormative, heterosexual framework of thinking, which is already, you know, excluding a lot of queer ways of being. So how can we have a critical discussion that is still, you know, inclusive of all ways of being, whether queer or not? So some articles that I'm plugging in there are Polluted Politics by Giovanna De Ciro, and also Toxic Sexes by Malin Aking and Eva Hayward, which I really recommend reading because it talks a lot about this sex panic over like gender ambiguity and this kind of concept of oh, we have to clean up the environment and return back to this pristine idea of nature, which is also like false. And, you know, nature is also a human construct, the same as gender is a human construct. Yeah, because, you know, we have this situation where, you know, exposure to plastics is actually, you know, it really is affecting our reproductive capabilities and also our genital morphologies. There's this really interesting study where they were looking at the distance between the anus and the genitals in these baby boys. And they were comparing that to the amount of plastic exposure that the pregnant mothers had. So, you know, they were taking the urine samples of the pregnant women, and then after, when the babies were born, they would measure the distance between the anus and genitals. And what they found was that the distance is actually getting shorter and shorter over time, over a population scale. Yeah, for me, this is like really, really fascinating. Also on a symbolic level, because if you think about it, the genitals are the most gendered part of our body, whereas the anus is the most universal part. So it's like the genitals are like getting closer and closer to like the most universal part of our bodies, which is kind of interesting. But, you know, when we're talking about normativity and non-normativity, you know, we have to consider how much policing actually happens to bodies that are not fitting within the norm. Because, you know, this is the reality that we live in. Like we have, you know, discrimination against intersex people who are born with ambiguous genitalia. You know, like this is a common practice in the US where, you know, if a baby's born and the genitals are ambiguous, you know, they have this like measurement, like, okay, a clitoris should be this size. If it's bigger than this size, then it should be a penis. But then if it's in between, then it's like, all right, we have to do some kind of surgical intervention to make the child either a female or male. So this is like an extremely violent process that we accept as normal because, again, like we're trying to enforce these gender binaries. And, you know, we have this like on the other side, you know, we have this kind of like, let's just clean up, let's just like contain and remove all of these contaminants and pollutants from our environment, which to me is not a viable solution. That's why I'm plugging in Toxic Progeny and Queer Futurities by Heather Davis, which is a very interesting article talking about how we could consider plastic as our progeny, as our children, our offspring, and therefore be responsible for them as if they were our offspring. And she also talks a lot about the future being extremely queer, and how there is a need to accept these forms of queerness if we are to continue living in this very, very polluted world. And now I'm going to present this kind of outline that I made in my own practice, which I call a 3-step process for living in an increasingly queer world. So I'm really centering xenofeminist theory in this outline. So first, we have toxicities. You live in an alien landscape that is colonized by hormones. Step 2, semiosis. You are already alien with plastic in your blood and in your urine. And step 3, subjectivities, is asking you, do you want to be more alien than you already are? So this is taken from a project I did in 2017 called the Molecular Queering Agency. And for me, what was really interesting was thinking about the idea of consent and the fact that none of us consent to live in a toxic world. But what if you had this consent? Like, what if you could ask yourself, you know, like, do I want to be more alien? Do I want to acknowledge my body as a changing and constantly mutating entity rather than a body that is fixed and unchanging, which is how we view gender and sex, as fixed and unchanging? You know, what if I looked at my own body as, and my gender as not having a final destination, but always constantly changing on the continuum? And, you know, I started to also think about, you know, our bodies as constantly glitching, like my computer screen just now. Because, you know, this is a graph that was taken online, and it's actually a very long graph. And it's basically a snapshot of a random person's blood sample. And all of these molecules that are traversing through this person's blood at, you know, one point in time when they sample the blood. And you can see, like, you know, it's constantly changing. Like the next second, your blood can be completely different. And so we are such responsive bodies, you know, responsive to the environment, that how could we say that there's only 2 genders? Like, how could we say that, you know, we don't mutate, you know? So these are kind of like xenofeminist strategies that I have floating around in my head when we're thinking about, you know, how to live and act and care in a permanently polluted world. So that's kind of the end of my presentation portion of this workshop. Before we get into the hands-on portion, I just wanted to present a question for everyone to contemplate as we're doing hands-on stuff, which is, what does queerness mean for you? And I would really encourage people to type in their responses, either like, you know, now or later on or at the end of the workshop. But I just wanted to, you know, pose this question so we can all contemplate it as we're, you know, playing with urine, which is what we're going to do now. So I lost my cursor. Just one second. So weird. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Mary, do you think that we should maybe do also a short Q&A now, or would you like to postpone this for later when we have thought about the question you actually shared with us now?
Actually, what we could do also is take questions as we're going through the protocol, because Looks
Okay.
like we have about 45 minutes left, which should be enough time.
Okay.
So please feel free to type in questions, and Andrea, if you can like let me know like if a question pops up, because I'm gonna be
Oh, now you're freezing.
doing hormone hacking stuff, so my eyes will not always be on the chat box.
Yes. Maybe just say the last thing once more. You were, for me at least, you were freezing.
Oh, okay.
Maybe just
Basically, I just
repeat.
said. So basically, if a question pops up in the chat box, please just like let me know, like, hey Mary, and then I will just like check the chat box, because I'm going to be doing stuff behind here, and then I might not see the question when it
And you will talk to us during that you're working behind us. You will talk to us, no? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna do like a step-by-step like cooking show. I have this wireless device so I can move around. If anyone wants to do like a quick bathroom break or something, like we can do that now. I'm just gonna set up a little bit and then we can get started.
Okay. So then maybe use the time to to do this 5-minute break, Mary. Like there was a proposal in the chat to do a 5-minute break. Let's do that. Really.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Can
So
it
let's
be
all
that you
come back.
shared? Just one question, Mary. Have you shared your screen now?
No, I turned it off because now I just want the screen to be on the kitchen setup.
Because I see you twice now, I have to say, and it says that, but maybe that's just for me.
Okay.
Yeah, the question is, if we do a 5-minute washroom break now, shall we do that, because then we lose our fuels?
Yes, especially if you want to follow the protocol and collect your own urine, this will be the perfect time to do that.
Okay, so if we go, then we collect. We should take a glass with us and collect some material. Okay, so this is the advice to everybody. If we make a 5-minute break, but a really strict one, 5 minutes, and please bring your urine back from there.
So should we get started? I think that's
Yes.
5 minutes already.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah. So I'm just,
So shall I continue?
yes.
Okay. So thank you for coming to my cooking show. So what we're gonna do today is called a urine extraction protocol. So I already have my urine here. You can see. That's my urine. And I think the color is healthy. So basically, there's kind of like a hardware portion of this workshop and then like the scientific portion. I want to start with the hardware portion because this is basically where we can construct our column. So if you're not familiar with a column chromatography setup that you see in the lab, what they usually have are, you know, these very, very beautiful but expensive, you know, columns made of glass. And at the time, we didn't have any access to this glass column. So we decided to basically hack a glass bottle and turn it upside down and use this as the column. So we're gonna do a bit of glass hacking. We're gonna break the top off of this beer bottle here and use it as our column, or I will just demonstrate it really quickly. And then another part of the hardware is using this. So I'm using this as the hardware for creating our stand. So what we're gonna end up with is something like this. Yeah. So we're gonna create something like this using a, I think this is called a U-post. This is what they use for construction purposes. I think when they're trying to put like a wooden fence post or something, they stick it in here. But for me, this has like a lot of weight to it. It's very sturdy, and it's very commonly found in these like hardware stores. So that's why I chose to use this. And we're basically just gonna secure this metal rod using zip ties. So zip ties. So before we do that, I think we should first start with the glass because it's one of the more exciting parts, also one of the more dangerous parts of the workshop. So,
Mary, could you show the zip tie once more? Could you show
yes.
the zip? At that moment, it blocked. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Those ones, yeah.
So
Thank
I
you.
like to go for these like thicker ones, so they're more secure. So I just had some water boiling behind me, and this water is what we're going to use to break the glass. We're basically going to shock, we're going to temperature shock the glass. So one of the tools that I'm using to break the glass is one of these glass cutting devices. And this one you can find on Amazon between 20 and 40 euros, maybe cheaper. And basically what we're going to do is secure the bottle into this. And if you don't have this, contraption, you could also use like a knife or something to create a line, a line across the bottle. The issue is trying to get the line as straight as possible, which this is basically helping us to do because this will create a very, very straight line across the bottle. But you can also skip this portion, the hardware portion, if you already have some kind of setup like this. So basically, I'm just going to demonstrate how we go from this beer bottle to this cut glass bottle. So what this does, once I get it inside, I'm basically just rotating the bottle. And the sound that you should hear, I don't know if you can hear that, it kind of sounds like nails across a chalkboard. It's a very screechy sound. That basically tells me that it's cutting the bottle. So if you can see, I have this line going across the bottle. And I should have removed the stickers first because this will kind of interfere with the bottle breaking. But I was just a little bit too lazy to get all this sticky stuff off. So I'm gonna go in and make the line a little bit deeper just to make sure I cut through that sticky stuff that I was too lazy to clean off. So you can go over several times. Just make sure you're not making new lines, that you're staying on the same line that you initially made. Yeah, I think that's good enough. So I'm gonna boil the water just one more time, make sure it's super, super hot. So in this process, we're going to submerge this in super hot water and then run it through very cold water. And this will apply pressure to the glass and it will break at the line that we just created. So now we have this super hot water. I'm just gonna put it inside. Now that it's super, super hot, I'm gonna run it under cold water. I'm sorry I couldn't get that on camera, but basically the bottom just popped off. So it was actually that easy. Sometimes you have to keep doing it over and over again, like hot water, cold water, hot water, cold water. But this one was just like hot and then cold and then it worked. So now that we have our glass, I'm going to continue finishing this hardware component and just secure the zip ties. There's no one correct way to secure this, but I just came out with this, like, I call it like a butterfly method, because when I finish it, it kind of reminds me of like butterfly wings. So I'm kind of just looping the zip tie, threading it through the holes of the U-post, and then around the metal rod. Also makes a cool sound. And you just want to get it as tight as possible. So something like that. So like I said, this is just one way to do it. So now that I demonstrated that, I'm actually just going to switch to this one because this one is quite secure already. So in order to fix the bottle onto this metal stand, we have a couple options. So a lab would have something like this, which is, I guess they just call it the laboratory clamp. But a clamp like this would maybe run about 10 euros. It's really fancy. You can adjust it on both ends. I really like it. It kind of reminds me of like something you would use in like BDSM or something. If you don't have access to that, I found these to also be really useful. This is also found in a hardware shop. I don't know the name exactly, but you know, if you look around a building, you usually find these like fixed to the wall, and you have these like pipes going through them. So that's what they're used for. So this portion usually is like in the wall, and then you just see this like hugging a pipe. And I also found these like to be really useful. You would also fix these with a zip tie, and then you can just put your bottle inside like that. So that's the setup, the DIY setup that you would have. I'm going to just use the laboratory clamp in the interest of time. So I'm just going to clamp this here. And then the bottle is going to sit right in there. So before we do that, we're actually going to fill the bottle. So the materials that are going to go inside this bottle are going to be the materials that will attract the hormones in your urine so that they cling to the inside of the bottle. So that's essentially what column chromatography is. It's a separation method, and you can separate based on size or chemical structure. And in this case, we're going to separate based on polarity, which is what I touched on briefly earlier about like the chemical structure of the hormones, which we know to be this like kind of steroidal, fatty component with polar water-soluble components. So the column that we're creating, the environment that we're creating inside is going to be both polar and non-polar. So first, we're going to use this stuff here called parafilm. If you don't have access to parafilm, you can just use regular plastic wrap. This is just like a fancy version that they use in the lab. But I'm basically just going to cut a little square of this. So here's the parafilm. Looks like that. And it actually stretches. So I'm going to stretch it a little bit. Like that. And then just put it over the bottle, kind of like a condom. So there's the bottle. Do you hear that? That's the nice sound. So I know this is pretty secure, and then that's going to allow me to start filling it. The first thing we're going to fill it with is with cigarette filters, which I'm going to steal from my partner because I forgot to buy some. If you're curious what brand of cigarette filters to buy, I always go with something like Marie. And the way that we chose this brand was we actually did like kind of a solubility experiment. So we had like these very we had these solvents like methanol or like ethanol, which is, or acetone actually. And acetone is what you use for removing nail polish. So we took acetone and we just dropped it onto the cigarette filters. And if the filters like kind of like melted, that's how you know that it has the chemical structure that we need for this experiment. Acetone behaves very similarly to ethanol and methanol, and it's basically an alcohol. And alcohol really creates that environment that hormones want to stick to. So if the filters are dissolving in that environment, then we know it's like compatible in that environment. Some of these other filters that are like eco-friendly and like made from recyclable whatever, like those are not going to work for this experiment. So this is a good brand. So we're just going to open this bag. And I'm going to fill this bottle about 8 to 10 centimeters. It also depends on the shape of your bottle. If it has like a really skinny neck like this one, then you would fill it like maybe up to here. This one has a fat neck, so I filled it up to here. If you want to like increase the effectiveness of your experiment, you could also take off this paper around the filter. So once you take off this paper, you can kind of open up the filter to be a little bit more fluffy. Fluffier than this, but fluffy. And that would basically increase the surface area of the filter so that you can collect the hormones more effectively. So the next layer that goes in here is silica gel. See those blue little pearls? So silica gel is basically what you find in like packaged food or electronics. And basically it's preventing moisture from affecting those products, because what silica gel is doing is absorbing any moisture from the outside. So I bought the silica gel in bulk. Like I have like a huge tub of silica gel. And I don't remember how much that costs, but it's lasting me a really long time. And what I found online, there's actually two different options. They have a silica gel that will turn from orange to blue. So orange means that it hasn't absorbed any moisture. Blue means it absorbed moisture. And then the other option is going from blue to pink, which is the one that I picked because as we run the experiment, you're going to see the silica gel, it's going to get pink. And when it comes in contact with the water and the urine. And I like to joke and say that the column is feminizing, like it's turning from blue to pink. So, because of the hormones. All right, so I'm gonna pour this in using a funnel because you really don't want to spill these. If they spill everywhere and so put that in. It's a nice sound. Okay, this is actually not a good funnel. So that will be very hard to clean up. Should have just put it like this. Let's put some more. Okay. So I filled it about this much. You can kind of eyeball it. It doesn't have to be super accurate. And I apologize for the color of this bottle because you can't really see it, but the layer is about that much of silica gel. So now I'm going to put this into the column setup, hardware setup. Make sure it's nice and tight so it's not going anywhere. So this is our experimental setup. So we're actually halfway there. So the first part was just, all this hardware stuff, breaking the glass, filling the column, and now we get to perform the actual kitchen recipe. And it's actually very, very easy. There's only 4 steps. But before we do that, we're just going to make a very small hole in this paraffin that we put on the bottle. So I'm looking for this tool.
Maybe just so that we know about the time frames. I mean, I'm sure that I love to stay with you in this workshop also, but just so that we know how to plan our evening.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely gonna finish by
Please
7.
do so. Yeah,
Yeah.
please, and then we do a Q&A. No.
Yes, or you can also ask me questions now if you have any.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
All right, so I'm just going to use this tool. It doesn't matter what you use as long as you can effectively make a hole. I might have just made 2 holes, but that should be okay. I'm also going to lower this so that I can control the flow of fluid coming out of the bottle. One other really good tip actually is, see how this is a little bit like unstable? In the past, I've used like cutting boards like this cutting board, and then I just like drilled into the cutting board so that it stays more secure. But I don't have my drill with me, but that would really help secure your column so that it doesn't spill. So I think we should just get started. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to pour water through the column. And this basically means that we're conditioning the column. So we're kind of like preparing it for the sample that we're going to put through it. So I'm just going to get some water. So I have about 250 milliliters of water. I'm just eyeballing it, and I'm just going to pour it through the column. And you can see that, I don't know if you're picking it up on camera, but my column is kind of like spraying, which is not what you want. You actually just want like one flow, but I didn't do a good job making the hole through the paraffin, which is fine. I can just control it a bit so it doesn't get everywhere. The next step is we're gonna condition the column, but instead of water, we're gonna use methanol. So this is methanol. I know it looks like water, but trust me, it's methanol. This is probably the hardest ingredient to find because methanol is a very dangerous alcohol. If you've ever done any kind of like beer fermentation or something, or making like hard liquor, usually methanol is like the first layer that you would collect from what you distill, and you would just like throw that away because if you ever ingest methanol, you could actually go blind, and in worst case, you could die. So I'm gonna put my gloves on for this portion because I don't like how the methanol feels on my skin. It kind of dries out my skin and irritates it. So I'm just going to use this test tube thing as a measurement, because I don't want to use too much methanol, because since it's hard to find my methanol, I want to save as much of it as I can. So I have maybe 5 milliliters, and I'm just going to condition the column with this 5 milliliters and just pour it all around. And you can see that there was a bit of like smoking coming from the column. That's just the silica gel like breaking into particles and then creating this kind of smoke. And you can hear it now, it's still kind of popping, which is an effect of, you know, getting exposed to moisture. It just like pops. And yeah, I apologize again that you can't see the color. It's very pink right now. It's a nice color. So after this step, we just finished step 2. Step 3 is the urine. And so I'm going to pour the urine through the column, but I'm going to get a new empty container, because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to repeat this step at least 2 or 3 times in order to have as much absorption of the hormones to the column as possible. So I'm just going to empty this and start with the urine. So I feel like my column, it looks a bit clogged, so I'm going to increase the size of my hole. So I don't want my experiment running too long. Okay. I think for the purpose of time, I'm just going to do this step 1 time. Normally, I would take what comes out and pour it back into the column and repeat that process at least 3 times, sometimes even 5 times. So we're just going to let that completely empty out. And I still have a little bit of urine left over. Normally, I would have poured everything. So as the column is kind of peeing, I'm just going to show you what happens at the end of the experiment. So this is an example of a previous hormone extraction, actually a performance that I did in Oslo. So this person was kind enough to donate their hormones to me. But this is basically the hormones that came from her urine, but they are dissolved in methanol. And basically, now that this is finished, the last step would be to do the methanol. And when we do the methanol, we want to capture it in something that we can store, you know, like something like this, or you can use like a small glass jar or something, because this step with the methanol is what we want to collect and store, and then we want to evaporate off the methanol. So I'm just going to hold this. Looks like some more liquid is coming out. So in this step, I would pour the methanol in just a little bit. I would do about 5 milliliters. So actually, I need like a pipette or something. Okay. So this is my methanol. I'm gonna get a new tube here. If there's any questions, please post them before we run out of time. Maybe some people can also answer the question that I posed early, which is, what does the word queering mean for you?
Yeah, some answers came in, and I collected them so we can repost them so that we see them all in the end.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now I poured methanol. And this might take a bit of time to come out, but basically it's gonna look like something like this. And once
Mary,
we have something like this, oh yeah.
There is one question. Jules asked, so what kind of variation do you normally find between differing samples? Do your own vary across time?
Yeah, for sure. They vary in smell, I find. Like when someone like first collects their urine, there's like a different smell I notice. And I think it depends, like if you had a lot of coffee that day, like your urine will smell differently. I've also seen a lot of variation in like color, also cloudiness. I used to begin my workshops with these test strips, these like urine test strips, which will basically they're a bit diagnostic because you can tell if someone has like a urinary tract infection, or if they have like diabetes, like you would find like glucose in their urine, something like that. So we would do this kind of like, I called it like urine prophecy, like you're checking out what your urine is telling you. So I made a little bit of a mess, but this is what I was able to collect. And you can see the color is not as strong as this one that I showed you before, because this one was repeated many times, whereas this one was just like the urine only went through the column one time. So you can see that this experiment is not that effective if you don't repeat the urine step at least 3 or 5 times. Whereas this one, you know, we did repeat it and the color is much stronger. So more stuff was collected in here. So that's
One more question came in. What do you use the final product for? Would it be poisonous to drink, or would it work as HRT but very low tech frequency?
So I was waiting for this question because this is the most frequently asked question in all of my workshops. Like, what do we do with the hormones? Well, I would like to think that there was some kind of like use value for them, but for me, I see this more as a discursive exercise, like a way to visualize something that is otherwise invisible. I think that it's a great way to begin a discussion about what we actually are inside our bodies. Like, are we like fixed and unchanging, or are we like multiply composed, intoxicated beings, which is very evident in the urine that we collect and the hormones that we find. To answer your question specifically though, I would not use this for hormone replacement therapy, just because we are collecting like a bunch of hormones, not only the sex hormones, but also the stress hormones. You're also collecting like melatonin, like just other compounds that have this like 5-ring structure, which they are considered steroidal hormones, but they're not really isolated in a way where you know exactly what's inside this collection. Also, like I said before, the hormones that come out in the urine are actually conjugated. So they're not effective to the point that you would use them for contraception or for hormone replacement therapy. Like I said, like I think this is a very interesting experiment as a discursive exercise to to smell the hormones, to think about this idea of queering, being multiply composed, being alien. I would like to develop this workshop even further and be able to isolate the plastics that are in the urine, which is definitely possible. It's another separation method. I forgot which chemical they use, but it's the same chemical you would use to isolate plastics from your feces, from your poop. So I think that's also a very interesting exercise. But just to finish the workshop really quickly, when you reach this step, what you want to do is just open it up and let it evaporate. So make sure it evaporates completely to the point where, you know, you're like this, like you're shaking it and like nothing is coming out. You know, like the hormones will stick to the container, so nothing should be like loose and falling out. So so when you reach the step, just let it evaporate, and then once it's all evaporated, then basically it's methanol free and it's safe and you can smell it. And one thing I've done, actually two things I've done, because I'm stupid or I like risk-taking behavior. I've actually like dissolved it in vodka and I've taken it as a shot. I actually did this in a workshop and other participants joined with me to do it because this workshop was a bit of a cooking workshop as well. And we actually made these like hormone cocktails and we drank it. And we just kind of like observed ourselves. Like I said, like this is part of the slow violence aspect of it. Like it's so hard to perceive the effects of hormones because either they can span a very long time or they can happen immediately. Like maybe like I'll get dizzy or I will feel like a bit moody or something. So that's a very immediate effect, a very short span of time. But constant exposure, you know, like that's when you get like, or it also depends like if you're in infancy or if you're adulthood, you know, constant exposure, you're going to experience very different effects. Long-term exposure, cancers maybe. So these effects are very hard to perceive. Oh, and the second thing I did in a workshop in Hong Kong actually was we mixed it into a skin cream, and we kind of did like beauty facials with our urinary hormones. And the reason why we did that was because we extracted the hormones from this person who was a former beauty pageant queen. And the kind of context for that was her hormones, her estrogens would give even more femininity than a normal person's hormones. So we're kind of playing with this beauty culture that's so prevalent in Asia. Yeah, so are there any other questions? Because it's now 7 o'clock and that means it's the end of the workshop.
Like that Junior Esteval has said very nice thank you, and he has to leave now. Maybe we could do it now that either you post your question in the chat or you just unmute yourself and pose the question themselves. If you post it in the chat, I will read it out, or you just say something, or you show up with the video, Mary. Would that be okay with you? Shall we do like this, like another 10 minutes of Q&A and either showing up with video or saying it loud or posting in the chat?
Yeah, I mean, if you're comfortable with turning on your camera and your microphone, then please do. But if you're not comfortable with that, you can always just write the question into the chat box.
Yes. I see one question in the chat. Did you ever work out how to make estrogen in your kitchen sink?
So making estrogen implies synthesis, which really was the first goal of the project, was how to perform synthesis in your kitchen. I quickly realized that this was very, very difficult. I was considering using yeast as these kind of like biofactories for producing estrogen, which is a method that some companies use to produce synthetic estrogen. They have these like genetically modified yeast. They have like genetically modified plants, and they just modify their chemical pathways to produce estrogen. It was going to turn into like a really big like synthetic biology project, and I realized that I just didn't have the expertise, the money, and the time to do a project like that. But I would like to point out that the artist Ryan Hammond, who I've collaborated with in the past, so they are actually trying to do that using either yeast or tobacco plants. I'm not quite sure, but let me just type the project into the chat box in case anyone's interested. Oh, the computer's very far away from me. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Valeria, you popped up quickly with video. Did you have a question?
Not right now. I think it was answered in the meanwhile. Don't worry. Thanks.
Yeah. There, Deborah is posting, I'm doing parallel strength training. I won't be plugging in my camera. No embarrassing now, but as you mentioned, beauty competition with hormones, it reminds me 1960s and 1970s messing with hormones in sports, especially athletics.
Yeah, that's a really good association actually, because like sports competitions, like the Olympics, I consider them like the gender discrimination there is like through the roof. Like there were several like intersex athletes that were actually disqualified because of their hormone levels. Like for example, there's this one athlete, I think from Ghana, who was competing in the female category, and they basically their body was scrutinized by medical examiners, and basically like there were all these allegations that, you know, like, how is she performing so well? She must be a man. So they went and like tested her blood, found out like her hormones were like, her testosterone levels were super high. So they thought that was weird. So they tested her chromosomes and found out that she's actually XY. So yeah, that's the name. Thank you. And basically disqualified her from competing in the Olympics. And this was a really, really huge case. There were several cases after and before her case. But some of these athletes don't even know that they're intersex until this kind of medical intervention happens. I talked about the intersex surgeries early on, but you know, some of these children who undergo the intersex surgeries, they don't know that they're having an intersex surgery. They don't know that they're born intersex until much later on, sometimes into adulthood. They just remember, you know, going to the hospital a lot when they're a child. So, yeah, it's really, really horrible what they're doing. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Deb.
Can you read it, Mary, or shall I?
Oh yeah, I can read it. Okay, so Jules said, some Olympic athletes from the Global South were obliged to undergo clitoral cutting to continue competing, despite this giving them no athletic advantage at all. Do you know why they had to do that? Like, does it have something to do with the hormones, or because that's very, very strange.
Maybe we can wait for another input on that question. And there is this other question by Keminch. Hi, Mary. This goes back to a previous part of your presentation, but was wondering what your take is on the colonization aspect of molecular colonization.
I think they're inextricably tied. Like, I think that all of the industrial capitalism, globalization, and these inequalities that we see are definitely tied to the amount of toxicities that a group of people or or a nation is exposed to. Like a really good example is how a lot of Western countries are basically exporting their trash to these developing nations or to the global South. Like I think like countries in Southeast Asia are receiving a lot of trash from Canada or from the Western nations, which is really you know, trash is something that we really try to hide. Like we really try to make it invisible. But in fact, you know, the trash has to go somewhere. And it's usually these countries that are already like have been colonized, that are not at the top of the hierarchy, that are receiving this trash. So I think it was just last year or 2 years ago, China decided to stop all of the trash being imported from other countries. And I remember there's this huge like global meltdown. Like everyone was just like, oh my God, what are we gonna do with our trash? So finally, you know, trash at that point became visible for us. We realized like there has to be another solution besides just moving the trash from point A to point B. So I hope that answers your question. It's a very good question. I would recommend checking out those the literature that I posted, like slow violence and also discard studies. Trash in many ways is showcasing our inner self, especially biologically. Yes, and many of us don't realize that trash actually enters back into our bodies through the environment, you know, because all of these microplastics that are breaking down from bottles and trash bags, you know, they enter back into our bodies. And so there's this kind of like porosity that we have that we don't realize. You know, this porosity is what constitutes our alienness, our ability to queer and to mutate and to change. So whatever we throw away, we should think of it as something that enters back into our bodies, because we are very porous with our environment.
Can I ask something? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I missed the beginning of the workshop, but I don't know if people are aware of, or are you aware of the statistics of intersectional babies born intersex? You know, because about 15 years ago, I heard that in the States, it was 1 in 5. And when I told people this, they said, no, they can't believe that. But 1 in 5 babies are born with both genitals, you know, or, you know, with both a womb and a penis or something like that. But it was quite a lot of instances of children being born like that. And I think people aren't aware that there are a lot of human beings born that way, basically. And so your work is really important. Your work is really important.
Well, the numbers, so we actually can't get an accurate number on that because of these intersex surgeries, which is really unfortunate, because I've heard that the amount of people who have red hair in the population is the same amount of people that are born intersex. And so I've heard, I've heard one in 2,000. I've heard between 1 in 2,000 and 1 in 200. That's what I've heard.
Right. Yeah. So that's a lot of people, actually. A lot of people.
Yeah, I mean,
but I've heard.
That's a huge variance that we're just ignoring.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Jules is on the screen, so we see Jules now. I see the video of Jules, so maybe she has a question. Do I understand that right?
Oh, I wasn't going to ask a question, but I didn't have a question. But
okay.
I think the estimate's normally 1.7% for intersex people, so not quite 1 in 5, but it's around 1.7%. But it depends, of course, what you count as an intersex variation, which there's a lot of discussion about. So
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
1.7.
Okay.
So there looks to be a question by K. Min
To
So.
get out of the comfort zone and embarrassment. Mary, what is your opinion about on any kind of enhancements that are happening actually with implements in our bodies, and how do you think, because this is on hormonal level, which is very structural and it's very influential, what do you think about the implements that we put in everyday life, and how do you see this is going to be developed in a couple of years?
Do you mean how to regulate our exposure to these molecules?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just molecules. I mean, we already have the hormones that are going to be, in female bodies. They are putting, so it's already there happening. But the thing that is becoming like something like it's everyday life. In what amount you think it's been actually? Is it an upgrading as transhumanism, or is it something that in what direction you think we are going to go?
I mean, I know that in a lot of like transhuman scenes, or even like bodybuilding scenes, like bodybuilding workshops I've been to a lot, they're always like, rejecting estrogen, rejecting soy from their diets, things like that. Actually, a lot of my research on how to avoid xenoestrogens, a lot of it came from these bodybuilding websites, which I kind of associate with like transhumanism, but not as techie. But I think it's really interesting to think about like what kinds of body modifications do we consider to be acceptable? Like we think like dieting and having like a perfect body, like sculpted, skinny, like these are all like acceptable beauty standards, and therefore those kinds of like interventions like plastic surgery, fasting, dieting, like that's all acceptable. But what I don't see as acceptable yet is like DIY hormone therapy. And maybe it has to do with the stigma that society has over trans people. And it could be that because trans people are already so discriminated in the medical industry and clinics and things like that. And there just aren't enough doctors that are really informed or educated enough to work with trans patients. So I think it's really interesting. That's why I was posing this question of like making the hormones in your kitchen, what are the ethics of self-administering? And I just want to say like, although we're doing all this kitchen hacking, I would still be super careful about what you put in your body, especially when it comes to hormones. And this goes to everyone who is also taking a hormonal contraceptive, because I'm seeing a lot of women, lots of queer feminist people who are actually rejecting birth control pills because they see it as something that is manufactured on the corporate level, and basically corporations giving us no other option but this pill that is actually very toxic. It's synthetic. So that's the change that I see. Like, feminism back then was about taking the pill, like about the sexual liberation. But now I see feminist groups really rejecting the pill because it's seen as something toxic. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I mean, maybe I think we maybe can take the last question and then we do kind of a wrap up. So I'll read here that came in. So thanks, Mary. Completely agree that the movement of global trash and its toxicity is slow violence, but was wondering more about the link with the molecular in terms of pharmaceutical products like the pill, where you're going more in the direction with big pharma and its violences. So how the slow and the big is connected.
Yeah, I would definitely group the pharmaceutical industry as part of this industrial capitalist trifecta, which is, petrochemical, agricultural, and pharmaceutical. So these are the three main companies that are really producing compounds, producing products that do leach out into the environment and, come back into our bodies. So this is something kind of interesting that maybe is not explored enough. But, you know, if you are a trans person taking hormone replacement therapy and you are exposed to a lot of like environmental estrogens, you know, that might interfere with hormone therapy. Like it might like produce like really bad side effects, like maybe thrombosis or something. So, you know, I think it's good to think about all of these molecules as like, you know, interacting with each other. You know, that goes with like your diet, your the products that you buy, that you consume, what kind of soaps you're using. Like these are all kind of interacting with each other, and you can't really isolate. You can't really say like product A causes effect B. So it is quite hard. It is quite hard to really like live clean or, you know, live healthy in these times. But I think with this kind of awareness, you know, and this you know, also reconfiguring your mind to think about what is actually like a multiply composed body, you know, that's, I think, one way that we as like an individual can handle living, or as a community can handle living in this toxic landscape.
Okay, Mary, I think first I have to thank you for giving us, walking us through all those complexities, also with this very concentrated pace that I experienced here. I really enjoyed it, and I mean also this being allowed to, as a list, to be listening to your cooking show or to watch it, and also to simply enjoy it in a way. Yeah, thank you very much for guiding us or for through all of this. I wanted to offer one thing for everybody before we end the meeting here. On the one hand, of course, you please share your impressions now in the chat also. But one thing that I always experience as being not so nice with those online sessions is that you don't have those fade out situations of after talk, post setting at the like the drinking table or something, or snacks table or the like. So what I did is I set up 3 Jitsi spaces, a green one, a red one, and a pink one. And for anybody who likes those also kind of lottery of meetup, please just maybe use those. I won't be there maybe, but it's so anybody who wants to use it, just set it up so that that you can use this maybe as a fade out space. But it's an experiment, and use it careful, because also in the sense of how we carefully act with our bodies and are also responsibly act with what gets in and what we drop out again at one point. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mary. Parika, do you want to say something maybe also?
No, I was just thinking, I really like this idea of having a couple of tables where you can go fade out, have a drink and little chat with people, and not knowing who will appear there. Yeah.
Yeah, but be responsibly. No places are unfortunately free of free of vulnerabilities. Let's say it like this. So let's take care of our vulnerabilities.
We're just ending the session.
Ah, okay.
No. My child is here. You wanna say hi? Say hi. Hi. Hi.
Hello. Can we please have your consent for recording?
Can you say I consent? Hi. Oh, okay. Whoa. Okay, so maybe this is a good time to end the session.
Yeah. Thank you once more. Valeria, do you want to say something?
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. Let's
have a good evening.
Wave a little bit. Thank you so much, Mary, for this great evening workshop.
Thank you.